Hey YouTube, this is Justin, aka Demonic Sweaters, and today I'm here with a synthesizer tutorial, more specifically a tutorial on how to program the Kawai K1, and even more specifically how to create the famous Lyle Mays Ocarina sound on the Kawai K1. Now, the guy back there on my monitor behind me is Mr. Lyle Mays, and if you're not familiar, Lyle Mays is the keyboardist and piano player for the Pat Metheny group. And the Pat Metheny group are one of my all-time favorite bands, and Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays are two of my all-time favorite musicians. The album, As Falls Wichita, So Falls Wichita Falls, that came out in 1980, which is actually by Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays, has a song on it called It's For You. Now, apparently this song was written by Lyle Mays for his mother, but I'm not totally sure about that. But either way, it is a really, really great song. And in that song, there's this synthesizer patch that has become very famous over time. And it's basically a synthesizer sound that sounds sort of like an ocarina, but it's not exactly an ocarina, it just has a similar sound to it. So a lot of people started calling it the Lyle Mays ocarina sound. Now, actually, this sound is so famous that Keyboard Magazine actually wrote an article about how to program the sound on a Prophet 5. Now, I used that article as my basis to creating my sound on the Kawai K1. Now, the Kawai K1 is a totally different type of synthesizer than the Prophet 5. The Prophet 5 is an analog synth that has analog oscillators, but the Kawai K1 is a sample-based 8-bit synth from the 1980s, but it does have the correct type of waveforms on it, so I figured it probably is possible to create this sound because it doesn't sound like a super complicated sound, but it is a really, really great sound though. So I went out to program it for myself, and I think it came out pretty good. It doesn't sound exactly like it, but what do you expect? You know, it's a totally different synth, but you know, with a little bit of reverb and stuff on there, it's gonna sound pretty darn close. I'm going to show you how I actually programmed it, but just to go over the concepts of this sound is basically the original sound was two oscillators with square waves, and the two oscillators would start with a kind of a, not a very slow attack, but just like a wind-like attack. The second oscillator over time would kind of drift down in pitch, and so this would cause almost like Lyle's original concept was when he was a young kid in school and all the kids would be playing recorder, he talked about how, you know, some of them would play out of tune, and that sound of how they all sounded together was what he was kind of going for with this original patch. And so the way that the Prophet could do this was by using a envelope to actually bend the pitch of the second oscillator over time. But the Kawai K1 has envelopes, but you can't apply them to pitch. So the way I did this, instead of using two oscillators, I used four oscillators, and then one of the oscillators, the first one, actually it starts in the correct pitch, and then the other oscillator comes in as the first oscillator is fading out at a slightly lower pitch, and then the two other oscillators stay on and kind of blend in with the whole thing at a steady pitch. So you have one oscillator that kind of comes in first with two more, and then the first oscillator kind of fades out, and then the second oscillator comes in at a slightly lower pitch as that first one is fading out. And I think it achieves a very similar type of effect. Anyway, I'm gonna show you how I did that in the K1. Hopefully you'll be able to see it good enough, because the screen is a little bit hard to see on video on the K1, but I'm gonna do my best. So here we go. Okay, I think I got it so you can actually see the screen of the K1 there. And all right, so I had already created the patch here. As you can see, I even called it Lyle Mays, and I have it on single patch on the Kawai K1 under A1. So another thing I was going to say too is, if you don't feel like doing this yourself, I'll just post a syzx file that you could download, and if you know how to transmit syzx data to your K1, you can transmit the patch over there doing that. And I actually created a tutorial on that many years ago, so I'll post a link for that one down below as well. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So I'll play the patch a little bit here. You can hear it. Okay, so you're only hearing it through the camera audio right now, so it's not going to be as clear as it was in the intro, but I think you'll get the idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through everything that I did here. So first thing you're going to want to do, obviously, is you can open up any patch to start with. If it's a little bit closer to the sound already, it'll be easier to do. But any sound will work. It's pretty easy to program, you know, basically from any type of sound. So let's go ahead and press Edit. And then what we're going to do first is go on the Common function on the K1. And just make sure your common is set to 4 sources, which is oscillators. They just call them sources. So if I were to turn some of these off, if I turn off the last 3, you can hear the very first oscillator I was telling you about, how it comes in and fades pretty quickly. So listen. Now if I play the second oscillator alone, turn off the first one, you hear how that one fades in. Now if I turn these on together, you can hear the kind of morphing of the 2 sounds, and if I blend it with all the other oscillators, it gives it that bending sound towards the middle to the end of the patch. So anyway, just make sure on Common Sources 4, and then let's go ahead and press Common again. Vibrato depth, you want to make sure is on 0 for every single oscillator. So you go through all of them, make sure that's all on 0. And then we're going to go to Common again, vibrato speed. Everything is 0 again on vibrato speed. Shape, it doesn't matter because we're not using vibrato. Pressure depth, make sure is on 0 for everything. Wheel, you can just leave that at depth. Auto bend, also make sure that's at 0 for everything. Auto bend time, make sure is at 0. And then velocity depth, 0 again. KS time, 0 again. Common pressure to frequency, make sure all of that is at 0. Now pitch bend, this is up to you. I have mine set to 1. I'm using a pretty generic MIDI controller right now that doesn't have a great pitch bend wheel on it. It just has a little button. So this is just going to tell the K1 how much the pitch bend wheel will actually bend the note. So right now if I go, that's how much 1 will do it. If I turn this to 2, it'll do it that much. But I mean, you get the idea. That's just going to affect your pitch bend wheel. So let's go ahead and do Common again, and then KS curve, you can just keep at 1 if it's there. And then poly mode, okay. This is something actually, I believe on the original Lyle Mays sound, it was actually a mono sound, which you can do on the K1 if you set to solo, but solo on the K1 does weird stuff to the attack. So to give you an example, here's what it sounds like on solo. You hear how the attack is much more sharp, so I don't really like that. It doesn't sound right to me, so I just keep it on polyphonic 1, and that sounds more accurate to me. So polyphonic 1, and then I believe that's everything for there. And now we're going to go over to frequency. Okay, so frequency course, you're going to want to make sure that everything is on 0 for all 4 oscillators on frequency course. Now, the fine frequency is where we're going to play with it a little bit. So on the first oscillator, set it to 0. Second oscillator, you're going to set that to 5, or I have mine to, minus 5. And you can play with that a little bit depending on how much of a pitch bend you want to have. But for me, minus 5 it sounded the most accurate, so you could go with that if you want. And then fine frequency for the third oscillator I have at positive 1, or just 1. That way it's just a little bit, there's a little bit of bend in there all the time. Or not bend, but a little bit of detune going on the whole time. Because when I listen to Lyle's sound, it sounds like there's a little bit of detuning going on pretty much consistently throughout the sound. And then if we go back to the fourth oscillator, I have the fine frequency on 0 on that one. Now, as far as all the other frequency settings, you can pretty much have everything set to 0 and off, except for keyboard track. You want to have that on, obviously, because you want the notes to play. So, but everything else, you're basically going to leave alone. Now let's go over to wave, because this is a pretty important part. Now the wave is your oscillator sample that the K1 is going to use. So I have 33 selected for every single wave on here. Now you can play around with this a little bit. There is a pan flute sample that I think is on 64 that sounds okay, but to me 33 is just the basic square wave and it sounds the best. So 33 on all 4 oscillators is what you're going to want most likely. You could try putting in, you know, I'll just show you one here. Let's put in the 64 for the pan flute oscillator and see how that affects the sound. I mean, it's not drastically different, so you could go with that if you want, just to play with it a little bit. But for me, I like 33 on all of them. And a good resource too for the K1, and I'll post a link for this down below as well, is the wave list. There was a part of the manual that basically tells you what all the oscillators are, and I think there's 256 or something like that. There's a lot. So, but there's a reference to it in the manual, and or it's a separate book actually than the manual, but I'll post a link to that. All right, so let's move on. Wave select, we're done there. So now we're going to go to the envelope section, which just is the pretty essential part that we're going to need to make all of this work. So first off, for level, this is just the level of each individual oscillator. So I have all of mine set to 60. You may want to change that to lower or higher depending on how you're going to do it, but 60 seemed to work for me. So you could just follow mine. And let's hit envelope again. And then, okay, so oscillator number 1, we have the delay set to 0 because we want it to basically start playing immediately. Now, oscillator number 2, I have this one set to 30. And this is the one that's fading in and is going to be the lower pitch, the slightly lower pitch that's going to replace oscillator 1. And then oscillator 3 and 4, we have those all on 0. So everything's on 0 except for oscillator number 2, which is set to 30, and that is under envelope delay. So let's go ahead and press envelope again and go back to oscillator 1. We're going to have attack set to 30, and then oscillator 2, I have attack set to 70 because that's the second oscillator once again. And then let's go to oscillator 3 is back on 30 again. And then oscillator 4, well, it says 32, but it should be 30 as well. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if it's that close, it's not going to make a huge difference. So once again, attack on all the oscillators. Oscillator 1 is 30, 2 is 70, 3 is 30, and 4 is 30. So let's press envelope again. And now decay. Now for oscillator 1, decay, we want to set that to 70, and that's going to cause oscillator 1 to actually fade out. And then we have oscillator 2, 2 is set to 100, and 4 is set to 100. 3, this one also, I don't know why it's at 57. It should be the same as the other one, which is 70. And so what I'm doing here is I'm having 2 oscillators kind of fade out and 2 of them stay on. So that way it's basically the same. It's basically a 2 oscillator sound, but using 4 oscillators because 2 of the oscillators fade out while 2 of them stay on. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's go ahead and press envelope again. Now sustain on oscillator number 1, you're going to want to set that to 0. Because that will allow the decay to work correctly to fade it out. And now we're going to go to oscillator 2. Sustain I have set at 70. Oscillator 3 I have at 0 again. And then oscillator 4 set at 70. Okay, and then let's press envelope again. Now release, I have, one of them got accidentally set to 36, but all of them should be set to 30 for release. All right, envelope, one more time. Velocity curve, actually should all be set to 1. Oops. And a couple of these, or set to 3 accidentally, but make sure velocity curve is all set to 1. Now, level mod, you can have those all set to 0 for every oscillator. Pressure, set to 0 for every oscillator. KS, 0. Now, velocity here, we want this to be set at 0 as well, because Lyle didn't use any velocity sensitivity on his patch. So make sure those are all set to 0. KS, you can set all to 0 again, and then that's it. Once you have all of that done, you just tap right, and then select the patch bank where you want to put it, and then just press yes, and then yes again. And then if you want to edit the name, you're going to go here to edit, and then type press edit again. Then you can go through and put in a new name, and then you have to rewrite it once again. But anyway, that's all. So it's not that hard, and that's the one thing I really like about the K1. It's actually really not that hard to program. It's, you know, you just have to go through various screens and stuff, but once you get the idea behind it, it's actually pretty easy. So anyway, that's that. All right, well, that's my take on the Lyle Mays Ocarina sound, programmed on the Kawai K1. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and you found it helpful. If you did, let me know, and you can always click the like button and subscribe if you want to. And if you get a chance, check out my Patreon page. It's just patreon.com/demonicsweaters. That really helps me out if you can do that. And yeah, check out my other videos. I have lots of stuff on here that's all music related. Keyboard, drum, synth, guitar, bass, all kinds of stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody, and have a great day. Bye.